Hi everybody, welcome to this demonstration of the Ponos installation process for installing the Odyssey components, Atlas Web API, and all of the dependencies required for that software. What is Ponos? Ponos takes all of the processes that you see here that have traditionally been used to create a Web API deployment, and it automates them into a very easy to follow and very consistent, stable 5-step process. Each of the processes that you see here is a manual process and often has links to other processes that need to be followed very precisely in a very precise order and come from documentation from different projects and can be very difficult to follow and get correctly, and is very time consuming and very prone to error. With Ponos, we automate all of this, and it becomes much more simple and much more consistent and creates a much more stable and consistent environment. Not only does Ponos create and deploy Web API in Atlas, it also creates the underlying common data model and Web API databases. So Ponos should work well and be complementary to Broadsea, which does come with a Web API database and a CDM database. However, the CDM database provided with Broadsea is a very minimal database. For example, it only has a few hundred concepts in the concept table. And in most cases, users are going to want to create their own database for testing or for production and incorporate that into Broadsea. For this demonstration, we're going to be going through this quick start guide for Ponos. There's basically 5 steps to it. We'll be running through each of the steps. This is intended to be a demonstration and not a setup guide. So if you want to do your own setup, please go to the online documentation. We'll provide a link along with this video. There's 5 steps to the process: provisioning a machine, downloading and installing the Yes components, running the installers that are not part of the automated process, including npm, Postgres, and RTools. We're going to then run an installer that we've built for the Atlas Web API and Fire to OMOP Atlas tool. The Fire to OMOP Atlas tool is what we're going to use to build our complete CDM, including a set of test data and all of the Achilles data. And then the final step is to actually run that tool that will do the creation of the CDM. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is provision an Amazon EC2 machine. There's lots of steps to provisioning an Amazon EC2 machine. It's not the purpose of this video to show that. There's a link in the documentation that goes into the details of how to do that. So here we're just going to show a very time compressed version of that happening on our test machine. Step 2. In this step, we're going to be using the Yes installer. It's a single installer. It's going to install all of the tools that we need for basic Java development and some other tools such as the JBC driver that we're going to need for Postgres, Apache Tomcat server, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, so now we've created our EC2 instance and we're ready to get started with the Ponos installation process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to launch Chrome in our new instance, and we're going to navigate to the NAC CAD GitHub site. And we're going to open the Fire to OMOP repository, and we're going to select the documentation. We're going to get started and Ponos, and these are the instructions that we're following under this link. So we've created our EC2 instance, and so now we're going to download and run this installer, and it's going to install all of our basic Java development tools like Java, Maven, Git, Eclipse. There's a Tomcat server associated with this. There is a Phi server associated with this. There are installers that we're going to use further in this process. So this is a big package that gives us um, a lot of stuff all in one big fell swoop. So we're going to click here to download the installer. So now I'll open that installer in the folder and we'll run it. And now the Yes installation is completed. And so now we can move on to the next step. Step 3. Step 3 is to run the installers that have not been automated. For various reasons, these install processes were difficult to automate, and so we decided to just have the user run them manually. So there's 3 of them. There's RTools, PostgreSQL, and NPM, starting from the bottom up. We're going to install the RTools first because that installer needs to be downloaded from the web, from our documentation page. We're going to then install NPM and PostgreSQL. We're going to accept all of the defaults for these installations except for PostgreSQL, where we're going to say we do not want to run the stack builder, and we're going to enter a username and password of Odyssey, OHDSI, all lowercase. And here's the installers running. We've highly accelerated this because we don't want to sit here and just watch them run. Step 4, we're now going to install the Odyssey applications. We're going to install Atlas Web API and the Fire to OMOP tool suite. This is going to be done by downloading a bat file from our quick start documentation page, moving that file to our Yes workspace and running the batch file. This batch file is going to clone each of the Atlas Web API and Fire to OMOP projects. It's going to clone the project from GitHub. It's going to build the project using Maven. It's going to install the project using Maven, and then it's going to deploy Web API and Atlas to Tomcat. And at that point, both of those applications will be ready to run, except there's no underlying database, and so we'll create the CDM and Web API databases using the automated process in the Fire to OMOP project in the next step. And now we can run the installer that's going to install our Atlas, our WebPI, and our Fire to OMOP projects. These are all Java projects that live in GitHub. We'll clone these from GitHub. We'll check out specific versions. We'll build each of these and install each of these and deploy Atlas and Web API to Tomcat, all by running this one bat file. So we'll download the bat file, and we need to move it to the web apps, the workspace folder of the Yes project. So we're going to take this bat file, we're going to copy it, and we're going to go to this PC, see our Yes folder, our workspace folder, and we'll paste it there, and we'll open a command window and run that. And this will take some time to run because it has to download all of the Maven dependencies, as this is a fresh build and none of them exist in our repository locally here. So we'll kick this off and let it run. And so now we're done with our install of all of our Java projects. We can see that we have Atlas here, we have the Web API, and we have Fire to OMOP. Atlas and Web API have been deployed to Tomcat, and so now we can move on to the final step of the process. We can run the Fire to OMOP Atlas tool, which is going to install all of our components for the CDM and Web API databases, including installing a test data set that we're generating from Cynthia files using the ETL Cynthia tool, and we're also going to run Achilles to generate all of the data that Achilles generates. So we'll go back to that same command prompt. We'll go to the Fire to OMOP project. We'll go to the target directory because we've compiled it in the previous step. We'll go to the Fire to OMOP directory. This is basically the build directory that would be deployed if we were just deploying this, but we've built it locally here, and we can run that Fire to OMOP Atlas tool by typing fire to omop.bat and giving it the parameter Atlas. And now we're done creating our CDM, and so we're done with the entire process. It took about an hour and 20 minutes, and now we can launch Atlas in a web browser. We can start Tomcat, and it will start Atlas, and we can see Atlas in our web browser. So from here, I'm going to change to our Tomcat directory. There is a bat file that's included in the install where I can just type tom, and that will bring us to our Tomcat directory. And I can start Tomcat with Catalina bat start, and that will start Tomcat in a new window. And we'll wait for that to start, and then we'll go see what we got for our test data in Atlas. Successfully started Tomcat in Atlas, so let's go back to our web browser, and we can see what we got by going to localhost 8080 Atlas. And there's our installation of Atlas. It's going to ask us about our SNOMED license. We'll accept the SNOMED license. We can go to data sources. We can see that we've loaded our ETL Cynthia from the 1K sample. We can select a report, and we can see that we have the 1,000 patients from Cynthia, and we can see the metadata about our patients. We've done our successful load and install of Atlas.